are listening to the Mountainside Podcast, and joining us in studio is Dr. Devin Pettigrew. Devin is an archaeologist who has spent vast amounts of time studying primitive tools, weapons, their effectiveness, construction methods, and so much more. Having the privilege to sit down with him for this episode, I learned a ton. This is a subject matter that I am infatuated with. We did a deep dive from hundreds of thousands of years ago right up to present day. Devin has conducted multiple experiments reverse engineering stone tools. We talked vastly about that, primitive war and hunting tactics. There's a lot jam-packed into this 2-hour episode. I encourage you to listen to it in its entirety, and I hope that you enjoy the conversation. Great to see you again.
Yeah, absolutely.
How's life?
Pretty good. I got a position at Sul Ross in Alpine, Texas. So, tiny little town in Texas.
Is that a good thing? I mean, I'm sure it's a good thing, right, career-wise, but
yes, it is a good thing.
Living in Colorado as long as you have.
Yeah, it's going to be a change. It's going to be a big change. It's great for me in terms of, the career, because it's so hard to get an academic position. But tiny little town in the desert down in Texas. So, big change.
Yeah. Well, we have a mutual friend, Donnie Dust. That's why you're sitting here. And
yep.
I think he's got some property or something. When we were spending some time together this last couple of weeks, which we're going to dive into heavily and what we were doing, he's got a bunch. He knows the area that you're going to.
Yeah, I was surprised because I thought when I told Donnie I'm moving away to, Texas, 12 hours away or something, he was going to be disappointed. But he's like, oh, man, I love it down there. And he was just like super stoked. So he's got some property down in the Big Bend area. And says he goes down there like 10 times a year and does survival courses, shows people what kind of native plants they can use, how you can survive in the desert, build structures, how to find water, how to hunt, or find small animals, that sort of thing down there. So it's going to be great because we'll probably continue to partner up on some things, and he's going to come down there. Yeah, and I'll have to make some trips back up to the mountains. So
absolutely, yeah, you're welcome here anytime. I mean, how long have you lived here? It's been
this is our 7th year.
Okay.
Yeah, and I used to take vacations as a kid out in the mountains all the time. So, up down around Lake City and stuff. So, Colorado's kind of like a second home to me. As far
whoa, we are getting a crazy lightning storm right now.
That was a good one.
The cameras just shook a little bit.
Yeah. Well, this is a good test. We got some new cameras in the studio, so we're gonna see if they'll last during the lightning, and yeah. Hopefully we don't get struck during this.
Yeah, it's pretty significant out there. I mean, we went backpacking over the weekend and came back last night, and it was a huge storm then as well, so it's like crazy weather.
Did you guys get rained on pretty hard? Yeah, the whole time?
Once we hit South Park, it was rain, and it was like lightning all around, big storms all around, like from South Park all the way. And then we got down out of the mountains, hit the Front Range. We're like, it'll be dry because it's the Front Range. Mm-hmm. And it's late summer, and it was just pouring. I mean, the biggest storm ever with hail and lightning all around us. We're like stuck out by Boulder. Had to pull off the side of the road for a minute.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was
crazy. I had to fly in from LA. I was hoping I didn't have to cancel. We barely made it in last night. We were scheduled for a morning flight, and then that got canceled, and I think it was due to weather. So we hopped in an Uber and went to Long Beach, me and my son.
Nice.
And then we were standing in line, and thank goodness for him, there was a flight going to Denver that they were boarding, and we were going to have to fly to the Springs and then up to Denver.
Oh, man.
And he was like, Dad, why don't we just get on that flight? And it didn't even cross my mind. I was just in the zone, and I was like, let's just go ask, and we did. Yeah. And we took the last 2 seats on that, or we were going to have to fly this morning.
Wow.
So I thought maybe I was going to have to cancel with you. So cheers to us sitting here.
Yeah.
Do you like that drink?
Yep. Yeah,
They're
it's
not
pretty
bad.
good.
Yeah, they're kind of good for you too.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I need a little bit of caffeine, but not,
It's like just enough.
extreme.
Yeah, and all the vitamins and stuff in it. So I guess, I mean, our time is a little bit limited today. I don't want to keep you too long. You got a lot going on. You mentioned you're going down to Texas, but I think to start with this, let's tell the listeners a little bit about what you do, because if I try to explain it, I'm sure I'm going to get it 50% of it wrong, at least. And then, what we did the last couple of weeks is as part of your work or body of work.
Yeah, so I'm an archaeologist. I do experimental archaeology. So that means you're trying to recreate ancient tools and figure out how to use them. When you use them, you also you break them, you leave traces of wear on them, that sort of thing. And especially when they're made of stone, that's what you're actually seeing in the archaeological record. But when you're looking at the record, you're seeing projectile points, things like that you don't know how they were used. You don't know their use histories. So what we're doing is we're creating replicas, using them, and we're tracking our use of them. So we know their use histories, and then we can compare those back to the archaeological record. And my main focus is hunting-related activities. So, hunting weapons, hunting methods, hunting tactics, that sort of thing in different areas, different climates. And not only do I use experimental stuff for that, but also ethnographic information. So in other words, more recent histories of people that lived kind of similar lifestyles, hunted with the bow and arrow, that sort of thing. Yeah, so that's my main focus is hunting, experimental work. And then I'm trying to expand out, broaden out, and make connections with modern hunters, because there's a lot of overlap. We're trying to understand what it's like to be human, what it means to be human. In order to do that, we need to draw significantly from the past. And so that's why archaeology is so powerful, because, for most of human history, that's in the past. Now,
it's totally intriguing to me. And, we talked about this up at that experiment, and I know we didn't have a whole lot of time, although we had an awesome evening after it where we got to sit around the campfire and have some freshly cooked bison, and just an awesome time. Some
delicious bison stew.
So good. Another shout out to Donnie. Mm-hmm. That's 2 already on here. But yeah, I have been intrigued with that culture from a very young age. And the reason why is my grandfather was a stone hunter. He was an arrowhead hunter back in the day. And we spent so much time around Colorado hunting for rocks, and finding every trip we would find something and pick it up. And I know that that's pretty frowned upon now. And I think a lot of the places that we looked are mostly private now, and we don't have access to them anymore. They've changed ownership and that sort of thing. But
or if it's on public land, it's very frowned upon because it's illegal. Yeah, but same way for me, because my dad, he collected arrowheads. He went out, looked for them, picked them up. His grandfather did. His dad did, and that's just what you did back then. It was like that was a pastime, and it was all over the country, and it still is for a lot of people. And when I was a teenager, I picked up a few points as well. But when you become an archaeologist, you realize number one, context is key. If you want to understand the past from artifacts, you have to know their context, and that means their relationship to other artifacts in place, specifically where in the ground they're found, the level, the depth, the precise, preferably within millimeters, the precise location on the Earth's surface, their orientation. Their relationship to features like hearths, all of that. That's how you build up a site when you collect all that information. And so what we do when we go and pick up stuff is we tend to pluck certain things, like certain classes of artifact, out of the archaeological record. And those are generally what we call, what archaeologists call diagnostic, meaning they have a particular shape that you can trace in time. You can trace the evolution of different shapes of projectile points, for instance. And so when we go out and we do surveys and we find points as archaeologists, we record them, we measure them, photograph them, and that can tell us, okay, we've got like a late archaic campsite here, and we've got some different things going on. We've got a bunch of broken bases of points. We've got flakes. We've got grinding stones. And that gives us a really good sense of how people are using the landscape. So like when myself, probably you, our parents, when we go out and pick those things up, we create a biased record where there's like, those things are just missing. Yeah. And when archaeologists come through, they can't say, okay, in this big survey of this huge parcel, we've got like 10 late archaic sites and only 3 middle archaic sites, but actually kind of interesting. We've got 4 paleo sites, and start talking about like how people are using the landscape through time. You basically lose that ability. And most places, Colorado has some hidden gems where you have like these preserved ancient landscapes, but they're very few and far between. They're really hard to find because people go out and pick up artifacts. But, the thing to recognize, and that archaeologists need to recognize, is that the reason that people do that is because they're interested. And that's really important. We want people to be
infatuated with that culture, like native, primitive culture. I don't know that much about it, but I've dove deep into like the history of, kind of when the Americas settled into tribes, I guess, more so, and vaster population. So a couple thousand years ago, right? To a few hundred years. Really.
Yeah, that's the time period you're interested in.
I'm interested in it all. It's all fascinating to me, but that is really intriguing to me because we have the best record of it, right? That's where you can hear these stories, and it's hard to tell what's true and what's not. And I think that that's why it's so intriguing about what you do. And I think it's fascinating that you've dedicated so much of your life and time to this. And so did it kind of is the origin of that from, maybe going out and kind of finding some of these rocks with your dad?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and they were hugely fascinated with this stuff. Both my parents. And so that's really what drove me to like develop a fascination in the past and become an archaeologist inevitably. And Dad was also big into hunting, and so that's absolutely the origin of it. So
I think it was for mine too, because I grew up in a family of bow hunters. We do have a very minuscule amount of native blood that's like held at a very high regard in the family.
Yeah, right. Same here. Yeah.
And I think it was just kind of that connection and I guess to ancient culture and ancient some of your own history, I think, whether it was our tribe or not that we were finding the arrowheads. But like, number 2, like some of these points that I have sitting on the table that Donnie's napped for me are, to me, they're just beautiful works of art. Like I've never found like anything like this, right? Like I found a lot of like small bird points, and that, to find something of obsidian or something like that and have this obsidian, spear point here, or would you call that a spear point, I guess, at that?
I would call this a dart point.
Yeah.
You got a couple of dart points here. Most of the quote unquote arrowheads that people find or talk about in the Americas are dart points, atlatl dart points. And then some of these are pretty big. You could use them. I mean, they're not so big that you couldn't use them on a dart, because darts come in a huge range of sizes, but you might be more likely to use something like this that's like almost palm sized as a lance head or as a knife.
For people that are just listening, that's probably about the size of Devin's palm.
Yeah, almost.
And then on video, I'll show this on camera real quick. That's a pretty big point comparison to my hand. So
that would be for a very large dart.
Yes. A real man would have to throw that.
Yeah.
But just the work of art, like what goes into napping this, like this started from a round rock, basically. I mean, and the way that they, what Donnie does, I highly encourage you to go follow him on Instagram or TikTok, and he has a lot of his construction methods and him making some of these points.
Yep.
And then, the fine tuning of it and even sharpening it. It's like some of these we actually used on the Bison experiment. So they've been resharpened from what they were originally. Like that thing was pristine when we brought it up to the experiment. And now you can kind of see where it's been resharpened a little bit.
It still has a nice edge.
Yeah. Incredible tools. But yeah, that was, I think that was my biggest. So those two connections, what the culture did.
Yeah.
And how, I guess in my time period, it's kind of after the 1960s, right? There was a high regard for living naturally, living off the land. I think that there still is. I think that that's why we're seeing some influx or resurgence in hunting again. I think that it's kind of a cool connection and stuff. So being intrigued with that culture, I'm ecstatic to have you in here today. So,
yeah, I mean, it's great. This is the stuff I love. And yeah, like you said, that interest in connection with nature, the natural world. I don't necessarily think that there is a good clear dichotomy between culture and nature. That's a fundamental part of Western perspective, of European perspective, that we definitely have here in North America as well. But there's something to it. We're living very different lives than people did in the past, and people definitely experienced the world, like the natural world, much more intensely than we do.
I think there's a huge disconnection. Just number one right now, and why you're maybe seeing a resurgence in it is the disconnection with food in general, right? And if you look back at these cultures, like staying alive was probably number one. Food was probably number two, right? So those kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And then protecting your tribe. And that was kind of the main concern. It wasn't like, God, I got to pay my mortgage, right? It was there. We have all these different distractions nowadays. And to the point, we're very fortunate, but that we're talking a few hundred years ago, we were still hunter-gatherers on a large level, even though that you could commercially maybe go to some sort of market or some sort of rancher and trade something, but still it was kind of providers for yourself.
Yeah, there's very few. Well, there's no real hunter-gatherers left like there were back in the day. People, like you said, there's markets, and people are generally practicing at least some small-scale farming. They're generally more sedentary, even if you go like deep in the Amazon and find people, with a few notable exceptions. But it's hard to find good analogs for that kind of life now. But I think what you're saying is, not that long ago, maybe our mental health was a little better. I tend to think that might be the case.
I would agree with that, because that's probably the main reason that I'm a hunter today is it's for my own mental health. That 2 weeks, or even if it's a week or 4 days that I get to take in September, is a hard reset. Because there's no distractions. People know they can't reach me. I mean, I do carry one of those Garmin inReaches in case of God forbid, a major emergency, or somebody needs to get hold of me at home or something like that. But I'm not showing that number out to everybody, or I'm not giving access to everybody to do that, right? So for me, it's a huge mental reset where I'm being left alone for 4 or 5 days by yourself, or only having small human interactions because number one, you're trying to be quiet, or maybe it's just at night at camp and you're dog tired, right? Like if you're actually hunting, because some people call it hunting and really they're going sitting at camp and drinking beer all day. My version is a little bit different. I like to be in the backcountry, have a base camp, be spiked out, be that far back, and spend some nights out there under the stars and immersed in the elk and the animals and just being around that. That's what it's for me. And sometimes I've done that solo, and like having that time to reflect and just disconnect, I come back just a much better person,
Yeah.
Sometimes it's helped me figure out personal problems I might be having in life, you know.
Yeah.
And
You have time to just.
I love
think
it
through
so
things.
much. I cherish it so much. It's not even really about killing an animal. It's more for me about being in nature and just observing and catching, a glimpse of a predator prey situation, even if it's a hawk and a squirrel or
and
whatever.
taking part in that predator prey relationship. I think that's a fundamental aspect for me, and it really just blows my mind that people think that some people think that humans shouldn't be predators nowadays. I mean, that's really what that perspective boils down to. You just think that humans shouldn't be allowed to be predators, but
we kind of owe it to our ancestors for them being predators and us being here.
Not only that, I mean, given the last 10,000 years of North American prehistory, we really owe it to the environment to be predators, because those predator-prey relationships, humans have probably been the number one predator of white-tailed deer. Probably, I can't say that without a doubt, but for a very long time.
Pretty sure that they are.
Yeah. So, and we use technology to prey on animals. That's just how our species is. That's how we evolved.
But
2,000
years ago, this would have been technology, right?
That's technology. Yeah. Projectile technology, bow and arrow, the rifle. This is how we prey on animals. And then there's nothing that's changed about that. It's just the tools have changed a little bit.
I guess that's a great segue to go into one of my next questions is, just because I don't study it and I'm not immersed in it, and you're going to have to dumb it down a lot for me and probably some of my listeners, but kind of the timelines of, I know that, and I don't know how long ago, but I know that like kind of the first technology in hunting, rather than maybe catching something with your bare hands, like some small game or something, the next step would maybe be like a blunt object, like a rock, right? Like throwing a rock. Then maybe advancing to clubs. And then just, I guess, where's the timeline in the advancement of tools up to the last 100, 200 years ago?
Yeah. So thrown rock, you can't identify. Right. Somebody just picks up a natural rock and they're trying to kill a rabbit or something. You're not going to see that in the archaeological record, unless in certain cases you might have like a campsite that you're like, this is a 3.5 million year old campsite, and we have a pile of nice hand-sized rocks that are like baseball size and just the right weight. That might be an exception, and there's been a few instances of that, but for the most part, you're not going to find that. And if people are fashioning simple boomerangs, hunting boomerangs to throw at animals, those are made of wood. You're not going to see that. Yeah. There's very few instances where that kind of thing is going to be preserved for very long at all.
Have they ever found anything like that?
So the first thing that comes to mind, and the best example are what look like javelins from about 350,000 years ago.
Really?
Yeah, and they were found in a coal mine in Germany. So they were buried up in the coal.
What?
Yeah, this was it was originally interpreted as kind of a natural cul-de-sac between ridges in this kind of marshy landscape that was off and on like a field and a marsh. And the idea is that people drove a herd of horses back into this area and then killed them with javelins. And they're just spruce branches that have been, or saplings that have been cut down into a point at one end. They're actually very nicely tapered. They're super well balanced, so they're balanced like a javelin should be.
Every kid's first whittled stick.
Oh, well, I mean, it's like once you progress beyond the kid version to like a teenager version, or I don't know, a late teen version, like a very nice whittled stick, very well balanced. And they're found with, I think there's some stone tools there, and they're found with the remains of horses. And I think there's a few other remains of animals, so that they were using the site for off and on. But yeah, so that's the best example, like complete wood.
300,000 years ago.
Yeah, over 300,000 years ago, and very well preserved. Yeah, so, but mostly what we find are objects made of stone, because stone is not going to rot away. And you have also in the old world, in Europe and Africa, these kind of simple flake points that are kind of triangular. They might be retouched a little bit, so they're carefully chipping the edge a little bit in some cases to resharpen them or to shape them a little bit. And we're finding those as well that have impact damages on them. So in other words, when stone is brittle, that's how we can shape it, because it fractures in a controllable way that we can learn how it fractures. And so that means when it hits a hard object, it breaks. And it tends to break in more or less predictable ways. And we call those impact fractures or impact damage. And so we're finding those with impact damage, and they date back, I think, about 500,000 years.
Really?
Yeah. So the idea is that those were used to tip javelins as well. So they were using not just the wood pointed ones, but actual ones with like a blade.
And I'm trying to do the math here, and I'm not a very smart guy, but like anthropologists they don't date humans back quite.
Well, it depends on what you identify.
There's so many different theories out there too nowadays too. It's like, I don't know what I'm reading into. So
yeah, our species, we go back almost 200,000 years. Not quite that, but it depends. And it's kind of difficult because there's a lot going on in with hominin evolution. At one time there were a bunch of different hominin species on the landscape at the same time, but it's kind of hard to say, well, these people weren't people, or they weren't humans at that point.
But we didn't think humans were developed that much, right?
Yeah, what I mean is, like, it depends, like, is Homo heidelbergensis a person, or is Homo naledi a person, or whatever. But these people were very similar to us in a lot of ways.
Okay. Because I know even, like, I've seen some videos of chimpanzees, like, using sticks to hunt and take smaller primates and
absolutely. Yep, they sharpen sticks in some cases. They sharpen sticks into kind of spears, and they go after.
They actually sharpen them too.
Yeah, with their teeth. They use tons of different tools, actually, and anthropologists, as we continue to study chimpanzees, we realize more and more, like, that they use tools that you would never find in the archaeological record, for one, and that's even hard. If you're, like, tracking a group of chimps, you may even walk across them and not even see that those tools are there. But they carefully fashion, like, leaves into little twigs and that sort of thing to get ants and just all sorts of things.
Yeah, I've seen them use them like a straw before, like almost, or something, or a dipstick, I guess.
Yeah, that, and they use group hunting methods as well. So usually it's the males. They'll get together and they'll, like, drive monkeys and push the monkeys past these key hunters that are, like, waiting in ambush. So
really,
yeah, they use some pretty crazy tactics and tools. Yeah,
that's crazy.
So it's not hard to imagine, when you watch them closely. This is where the earliest stone tools come from.
Sure.
It
makes a lot of sense, right? Like, from what we've discovered, and having a species that we can actually physically watch now, and even to the point where we're watching some evolution right in front of us, right?
Yeah, chimpanzees. The cool thing about chimpanzees is, if you go back far enough, I think it's about if you go back about 8 million years, there's a divergence, and we can trace that they're more similar to our last common ancestor at that divergence, at that split. So they're actually pretty similar to what hominins ended up splitting off from. Hominins being upright apes that walk on two legs. What they ended up splitting off from. So chimpanzees haven't changed as much as we have, as much as hominins have. So they're really useful in that perspective, because if you're studying the past in any way, anything you're doing when you're looking at the past, if you're looking at ancient people, if you're looking at biology, plant species, animal species through time, or even processes occurring on the Earth's landscape, you're using analogy. You're using modern analogs typically. Like we know that rocks get worn in water because we watch them. It happens all the time.
Over time,
we assume that
Just
happens.
go look at a riverbed.
Yeah, if that was happening 20 million years ago, it helps us understand geology and what we're finding in some of the strata. So, and I mean, you can take that to an extreme, how mountains are formed, all that we use modern processes. So when we're thinking about early people, how people lived, how they evolved, how they changed through time, that's what we're thinking from, are those kinds of analogs like chimpanzees.
Okay, so bringing it back to the weapon evolution,
Mm-hmm.
we went from blunt objects to the first pieces of sharpened stone or shaped stone, right? I guess at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was actually not quite. They're continuing to try and push this back, but about after 4 million years ago, you start seeing stone tools.
Really?
Yeah, and I think now the latest date, don't quote me on this, but it's like something like 3.8 or 3.7 million years ago. It actually may be a little bit beyond 4 million.
That's
now that I think
fascinating.
about it. But anyway, people are trying to push this back, and the record isn't perfect,
Mm-hmm.
So across all of Africa, people were living different lives, different species, hunting, using tools in different ways. And we only have kind of a little window of that in places where the strata are preserved or exposed and preserved, because the strata tend to get so deeply buried that it would be, how are you going to find, an environment where people were moving around, living in small camps.
Unless
When
there's
it's-
an excavation or
Yeah,
a
if it's half
major
a mile below the
erosion or
surface,
something. Yeah.
or several hundred yards or below the surface, it needs to be exposed. So in Western Africa, you have the Rift Valley, and that's where the strata are really well exposed and preserved, and you can just walk the landscape and find fossils, and occasionally you find stone tools, and that's how they're trying to reconstruct those ancient environments. So, what was going on the west side of Africa, not so much. We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's important. We're typically dealing with an incomplete look at the past.
Yeah. Hence all the research, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so then at what point in the timeline, because this is where I get a little bit confused, my general assumption is that the atlatl would be before the bow, because the bow is still such an effective weapon. But being on this research project with you, I've found out how effective an atlatl is.
Yeah.
Watching some of those high-speed camera reels and just like,
Oh yeah.
it's incredible, man. It's an incredible weapon that I'm totally intrigued by.
Yeah.
But like in history, when you picture somebody from a primitive culture, you're thinking of the Native American, full headdress, bow and arrow, maybe a spear, but there's never really an atlatl depicted in Hollywood or in
that's funny.
some of these films like Dancing with Wolves, or like, not to bring it back to that, but like this is where I'm getting my influence from, and a majority of the United States and around the world, really.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah, and a lot of the depictions in Hollywood are later. So you're looking at native cultures during like the 1800s or in some cases the 1700s, but even that's rare. It's hard to find a good movie. I can't think of one.
it's hard. It's ruined it for
like-
me a little bit.
Archaic, hunter-gatherers living in the Americas, which is really unfortunate, because I'm sure you could make a pretty sweet story based on that. And if you went back that far, you would see predominantly the atlatl and dart as the main hunting weapon, at least the main hunting weapon that's gonna pierce an animal and cause hemorrhaging, and that's how it brings down the
Especially
animal.
large animals.
Yeah. big animals. The atlatl dart was used probably when people originally came into North America, definitely by 14,000 years ago, but maybe even earlier. They probably had this weapon with them. And it continued to be used around 2,000 years ago. The bow and arrow is becoming more prominent and is starting to replace the atlatl, and it has replaced the atlatl in a lot of places. But it doesn't just come in and just people don't just drop what they're doing. Main reason we know that is when the conquistadors arrived in Mexico, the Aztecs and all of the neighboring groups, this was their main weapon of warfare. And they were using it against each other. They were also using it in hunting, to hunt. And early European explorations into North America even, the Spanish in De Soto's expedition were attacked by people with atlatls at the mouth of the Mississippi. We have possible descriptions of them in the Northeast, but what early Europeans are what they are tending to say is that they're using darts. They'll be using a bow and arrow or a dart. And it's like, well, what do you mean by a dart? Because at that time in Europe, it was popular to use these hand-thrown, small, typically fletched javelins that they call darts. They tend to call darts. Dart is just like a small...
Almost like you'd
javelin.
throw at a pub or something, right? I mean, a little bit larger, but yeah.
Much larger, yeah. I mean, it was basically a small javelin. And they were hunting with them, and they were using them for sport and stuff like that. So when they first saw these things in the Americas, it wasn't like, oh my God, they're using darts. So that's what they're writing about, and they're talking about it in the Baja Peninsula. I believe it was the Spanish that were attacked by people with atlatls and darts there. They talk about it in the Northwest Coast. The cultures were using the atlatl for warfare.
I mean, this
there.
makes a lot of sense for me for hunting sea life. And
then in the Arctic.
Whales, seals, that sort of thing.
Yeah, big time in the Arctic for hunting for hunting sea mammals. Yep.
Because it's almost very similar to some spearfishing methods, a little bit. Yeah.
And these work great for spearfishing, by the way.
Do they?
Yeah, if you can look up your regulations, but I think in a lot of states, certainly in Missouri, I've hunted or I've fished with this.
Can you actually hunt with these? You of all people, I think, would know. I'm sure it's state regulated because I know that you have to meet certain IVOs to.
Yeah, you have to look
take
closely.
Animals in the state of Colorado, but there's also a ton of invasive species out there where I know that you can go. I know in Alaska, I know the guys that have hunted grizzlies with spears.
That's crazy.
Pretty crazy. It's insane, right? I would never ever think about doing that, but
no. That's not my idea of fun. But
it sounds like a little bit of the line of playing with death, and you know what I mean? It's a little bit on that.
Yeah.
It's just too far off the spectrum for me.
Yeah.
But I get it, I get it too.
I
It's a
do.
challenge.
Yeah.
That's the whole reason I said yes to going up to this bison experiment. Donnie's like, we're going to field dress and bone out a bison with using nothing but stone tools. I was like, I'm in.
Yeah. That's going to be hard. Okay, let's do it. Yeah, absolutely. Can you hunt? It depends on the state, and you have to look closely at the regulations. Most states no. It's just not allowed. If you have invasives like hogs, generally they don't care what you hunt those animals with, and they don't care when you hunt them. It's just non-regulated. They just want them gone. But for the most part, you can't, and definitely not in Colorado. I know because I went to a meeting of the Board of Commissioners and asked them to legalize it, and I was actually surprised when some of them were like, "Oh, this is really cool." They're really into it, and then it was just a hard no, which is what I was expecting. So they kind of brought me up, and then
this is kind of a kept there is a small group of people now that I've gone down this rabbit hole, and as long as I've known Donnie. And now that I'm getting to know you, there is a community of people that know what an atlatl is. But I think for the
Yeah.
vast majority of the general public, like before I had Donnie in here, I had no idea. He had to explain it to me. So
Yeah.
can you, if somebody hasn't gone back and listened to one of those episodes, can you kind of explain the construction and
Sure.
the method behind what an atlatl is? Because I'm sure that there's some people listening that are like, what the hell are they talking about right now?
Sure.
I think pretty much everybody understands the concept of a bow and arrow.
Yeah.
It's pretty similar. We've seen a lot of depicted pictures of it. And
Yeah. And so I brought an atlatl in today that I want to
that's
give you.
awesome. You're
This
giving me
Yeah,
this?
this is for you. This
That's
is for
incredible.
for you to have fun with and for your studio. And I got a couple of darts here too.
That is badass. I wanted to throw one so bad when we were up there, but I didn't want to ask for anything. I'm a guy that
Oh.
doesn't ask for anything. So, dude, this means a
You
lot to
should
me,
have. You
Devin.
should have
This
just
is
asked.
so cool.
Yeah. So, and this is the dart.
Did you make this or?
Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome.
This one is similar to
Let me hold this
what
up
the
so
Aztecs
people can
were
I got
see.
using.
you on 3, so you're good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's
So-
it's like a Mesoamerican.
I'm going to give this
design.
back to you
Pretty
so you
similar.
can explain.
Sure.
Wow. How long is this? Is this,
That one's
Probably
probably
like
about 6
5
feet long.
and it's four shafted too.
Yeah,
That's-
it's got a wood
okay.
foreshaft.
I want to get into all that because that was something that I learned on the experiment that I had no idea.
Sure.
And it makes so much sense. But sorry, I'm jumping all over the place here, but I'm
Sure.
Dude, thank you so much. This is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I actually throw these?
Yes, that's what these are for. And
Hell
these
yeah.
darts I made I made that one a while ago, and I made this one just recently. But actually, students have been using these, but I picked them out because they're well constructed and they seem to fly well, and I didn't want to waste
Man,
them.
that's very nice of you, dude.
Students.
Like I don't expect
Um,
anything like this, so thank you. That's
Yeah, absolutely. So this one is what I would call like a Mesoamerican design. It has a peg through the handle here,
hmm
and it's about 2 feet long, give or take. And at the far end of it, it has a little hook, and the little hook or spur fits into a small indentation in the back of the dart, just like that. And the way you hold this one with a peg is with an index finger hooked over one peg and the thumb pressed against the other. The reason we know that is because some Mesoamerican artists depicted the grip very clearly in the depictions of their gods holding these weapons. And so it fits in there like that, and then you hold it with the dart. Really what you're trying to do with your grip here is you're just providing enough backward pressure to keep the knock of the dart up against the spur, because you don't want it to slip off like that. You'll just drop it. You want it to keep up to be fitted up against the spur until you start throwing, and then you release it, and then you're launching it with the atlatl. And the dart is flexible, so you can see that it's pretty flexible actually.
That's what was amazing to me is how much those things moved in the slow motion cam.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, they are quite flexible, and the reason for that is that they compensate for the arcing motion of
So
your
cool.
throw. So as you're throwing, the spur is starting to, as you start to throw, you're stepping in. So I should start by saying, in your ready position,
Mm-hmm.
the dart is up. You've got it up, kind of like up by your head, and you're aiming it at the target.
And
So
how?
you're
What are
pointing
you
it
using to aim?
downrange.
Are you looking down it like you would an arrow?
It
or?
becomes like instinctive,
Okay.
just like shooting a bow. You
Like
stop thinking about it.
subconscious
Yeah.
aiming.
Yeah, it's just, and you're shooting a slingshot. You're not looking at the slingshot. You're looking at what you want to hit.
Mm.
Same with this, but you've got it up. You're pointing it at the target. You're looking at the target that you want to hit. And then you step forward, usually, so I've got it in my right hand because I'm right-handed. I'll step forward a little bit with my left foot, and I'll just make a full throwing motion, a full arcing throw. With the atlatl ends up down at my side. You know, it's like when you throw a baseball or something, you don't just like stop in midair like that. You make a full throwing motion, and just
Which
let your
this brings
hand
up a
just-
great point. I think this is why sports originated.
Yeah,
I mean,
humans are
like
made to
throwing a
throw.
football, the same sort of thing. Like
Yeah.
we've kind of evolved to be able to throw things, right? And not so
Yes.
much climb. It's more
Absolutely. Yeah, our
about
upper
chucking shit.
our body is made for throwing. Yeah, and doing a lot of other things, but certainly much more so than other animals. Like we have very good physiology for throwing and throwing accurately. Yeah, so that's the goal. I mean, you have it up, you're aiming at the target, you just step forward, and it's a smooth cast straight at the target.
So I was really shocked, and I guess this is probably a good point for us to just dive right into the experiment. Donnie and I talked pretty in depth about it, but it was two guys sitting there butchering your data, I'm sure, and stuff. But so this is basically, I was shocked at how much of an extension of the arm this is, number one. So how fast the darts would actually fly, how much penetration they had, but even more how accurate you guys were with them, because you would call out like a certain spot on the body of the bison, or and you guys would try to hit that in certain spots, and to get some different impacts and some different swayzes, as Donnie calls them, but some point breaks.
Point break,
and that was just incredible. I had such a good time. So I guess diving into, let's talk about the experiments that you've ran over. It's been 6 experiments for your dissertation.
Oh gosh, yeah. I did, I think 5. Well, for my dissertation, I drew from 4 carcass experiments, and then I did a 4th one or a 5th one, and then I did this last one was the 6th one. So there have been 3 bison experiments, and
I got to be part of the last one, right?
Yep, that was the last one. Kind of a big burly bull with all of his winter coat still on him. He was a pretty substantial target, it turned out, but we were getting some real kill shots for sure. And so what I was intending to study, and I kind of started down this path when I was in doing my bachelor's program at the University of Arkansas. I was working at the Archaeological Survey, and I wanted to do this specific kind of experiment then, and I wanted a bison. And I ended up with like a day-old cow, but it was useful. I mean, I learned quite a bit, and I improved quite a bit doing that. And so that was really helpful. Then I did one on a hog, and then a couple on goats, and then I started, I've done 3 bison now. And so the idea is to capture a whole bunch of data at one time with this kind of experiment. It's what we call a naturalistic experiment.
It's kind of reverse engineering, right?
A lot of it is reverse engineering. We're trying to understand how these weapons were made, what works and what doesn't, and how effective they were, kind of all at once. So we want to see ballistics, we want to see impact damages, we want to see halves that work where the point is halved at the foreshaft, halves that work, halves that fail. We want to kind of capture all that at once, because it's like, it's sort of naturalistic in the sense like this is how people were using this weapon, or it's more analogous to how people were using this weapon than if you're to go into a lab and do what we would call a controlled experiment in a lab, where you're trying to control for certain aspects and you're trying to study like one particular variable. That ends up producing a very artificial kind of environment.
Well,
right?
we had kind of, and I don't want to change the subject too much, I'm going to let you keep going, but we had kind of talked about the reason why you were doing it on animal carcasses. Number one was it's the closest thing that you could get to a megafauna creature is a bison, pretty much right now. But like for you to throw into ballistic gel or something, that's so different, man. A human is so soft, and ballistic gel is set up to replicate human mass.
Well,
right? and even then it doesn't do a great job, because it depends on organs, and there's all kinds of different variables.
That's right. Yeah, humans are, and every other critter that you're going to launch a projectile into, or they're heterogeneous structures. They have like lots of, there's a lot of stuff going on. You have a bone, you have muscle tissue interconnected with the bone, you have skin overlying that, you might have hair, and then you've got different organ tissues. And ballistic gelatin is specifically designed to show similar penetration as into porcine muscle tissue, pig muscle, for firearms. It was never tested properly for this kind of weapon, or for an outlet dart, or for an bow and arrow. And there was a group in the late 90s that tested it with different arrows and crossbow bolts, and they found really remarkably different penetration. Like a sharp broadhead would penetrate less deeply into ballistic gelatin than through a pig carcass, and a field point, even if it's kind of dull, would do the opposite. It would penetrate deeper through the gel.
Less drag, right? I mean,
Exactly, yes. Less drag, because what the gel is capturing is drag. You have a bigger surface. You put a sharp point on there, it's got a bigger surface, so it's creating more drag, more friction in the gel. It's slowing down more quickly than the field point. So it just doesn't work at all, for this kind of weapon.
because that was the comment when I had, or some of the comments that we got was like, why wouldn't you just use? We have some people that don't think hunting is ethical at all, right? Or
they don't think humans should be predators.
right, yeah, 100%. So those were some of the most common questions that came up during that, and
why wouldn't we just
I didn't
test
have a great answer for them, so here it is now.
Well, yeah, so that's one thing. Ballistic gelatin, it doesn't actually work at all for this type of weapon. And then it doesn't capture a lot of, even if you're testing firearms, it doesn't capture a lot of what a bullet is going to encounter in a body. So when ballisticians are testing firearms, they're not just relying on ballistic gelatin. They're also using wounds in recently deceased animals, or actual wounds in people, like wound trauma in victims in crime scenes, or battlefield trauma. They're looking at data from that, and they're comparing it with ballistic gelatin, and you'll see there's a few articles out saying, wait, there are problems. If you just derive results from ballistic gelatin, it's not a good way to go into an operating room if you have a gunshot wound, because it doesn't tell you everything about how a bullet's going to behave in a body.
Right.
So even they are not just relying on those media that you would use in a more controlled experiment. Like
There's so many variables. I mean, you hit a rib. We've seen it.
Yeah.
We saw it firsthand.
Yep.
It either stops or redeflects or fragments, or, I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many variables.
Yeah, there's a lot's going to happen in a body. But we're using the naturalistic experiments. I'm not saying it's not useful to do like a laboratory controlled experiment, just that we want to compare. We want to compare the results from both. So what we're doing in this instance, we're doing these carcass experiments where we can see how points are actually behaving when they're penetrating skin into muscle tissue, into organs underneath. We're seeing what happens when they hit bone, what happens when they hit ribs, what happens when they hit a humerus, and how do they penetrate, how do they break, and we're capturing all of that at once. So what we're doing with the high-speed cameras, the really important one, capturing the impact from the side, is looking at the velocity coming in. So we have markings on the shafts, and they're set in a certain distance apart. So you have a scale in the video, and you calibrate the video to that scale and to the frame rate. You can track a mark, and you calculate the velocity. And then as the dart penetrates, you continue tracking that point, and you capture deceleration as the dart's penetrating through the animal. Yeah, you get the deceleration.
Oh, I guess, yeah, it makes sense. So
yep.
That's how you're calculating the speed and then deceleration from...
Yeah, the force necessary, or the types of forces that they experience. And skin arguably is the most resistive soft tissue on the body. So the first thing it's got to do is defeat skin. It's got to cut through skin in order to get into the body cavity. And what I've been doing is very similar to what forensics investigators do when they're studying knife stab wounds or like knife attacks. This is really...
Can we talk about what you told me? Wasn't there some scientist or something, or that conducted an experiment on cadavers or something with a knife?
There have been a few experiments on cadavers. Yeah.
This blew my mind a little bit. I was like, God, man, yeah. But right. I guess in the name of science,
and they're using people that have donated their bodies to science, and they're trying to understand how knife attacks, work on people, how they can guard against them for police, how they can interpret crime scenes. You show up at a crime scene and you have the murder weapon right there. It helps to know how that weapon performed. Did it require 60 newtons of force to penetrate clothing and into the skin, or only 20? That's valuable information when it comes to trying to interpret a crime scene. So that's what they're doing, and to understand the performance of different knives that are used in criminal attacks, they're generally isolating skin. And if you're going to do a more controlled study in that sense, you can take something like a skin simulant or skin that's been excised from the body and measure penetrating force through it with like a really controlled setup, like an instron tester or something that's going to push that knife in and really give you a really good force read back. So I was doing something similar where I take the point at which the projectile point cuts through skin, isolating the force just for that, and it gives you a sense of how the points behave or how efficacious they are, the different projectile points.
Right.
And generally what you see in the graph, like as you track the projectile point, the velocity graph, you'll see just a straight line where it's traveling usually about 25 meters per second or so. So that's like about 60 miles an hour, I think. And they hit the skin and then it just drops. There's a really fast dive in the velocity, and then it kind of tapers out and kind of declines as it penetrates the body cavity, and then it will decline again at the end when it hits skin on the opposite side of the torso. So yeah, you can isolate those points and get a really clear sense of how the different projectile points are performing or behaving. Yeah.
So I guess one of the things that I thought that was really intriguing during this as well is, one, your guys' accuracy, two, how many points you tested that day. I mean,
man,
what was the number?
Oh gosh,
it was over 100, wasn't it? Or
it was probably, I think we probably tested 40 or 50. Yeah,
it seemed like a lot. I mean, it was from 8 a.m. till 1 p.m. in the afternoon, and we didn't pretty much stop. And I thought it was really cool too, like even to take it a step further, so you could disseminate, where pieces flaked off or broke. You dyed the actual heads like with a certain sort of ink, right? So,
yeah, methyl violet dye. I know it's been used in medical industry a little bit. But it's basically a purple dye, and you just dip the point in there and it dyes the whole point purple in your clothing and your skin and everything else if you get it on there. So, but it washes out. But that means that when the points break, you can see exactly where they're breaking.
Okay. And then even we've caught some of it, or you caught some of it on your Highspeed camera.
Mm-hmm.
Which was amazing to go back and watch. Donnie shared some of your footage the last time he was in with us, and one of them was a Swayze break or a point break where it just like shattered against the hide, and it was pretty impressive. It obviously hit some sort of bone or something behind hide. And
that Bison, it was useful to look at the Highspeed camera because you could see clouds of dust coming off that thing, and that wool layer was thick.
It's just coming out of winter range.
Yeah. So we had points that were cutting through and penetrating fine, and then we had points that were just bouncing off. Some of them were hitting bone, and they were just failing catastrophically. Basically, the point was breaking. The hafts were just becoming obliterated under those really high velocity impacts with the really heavy darts that Donnie was throwing. You had some really dramatic breaks, but some of them were just bouncing. I mean, they were just like failing to penetrate.
Now, is some of that, because I know that there were so many different points and so many different construction methods, and I was just catching little bits of it because I was just along for the ride. I guess can we dial it back here a little bit and let's talk about what goes into one of these experiments? Because I was
Sure.
just like blown away. Like it wasn't what I expected. I figured when Donnie called me originally, I thought that I was walking into like a group of archaeologists from, CU Boulder,
Yeah.
and there was going to be, I don't know what I was expecting. It just wasn't what I expected in my head. And then I figured it was
Yeah.
like a few points and then kind of the butchering process. But I was shocked at how much craftsmanship was sitting there on that table, and time and
Yeah.
effort by you, and the foreshafts and the which I want to get into some of the construction methods here in a minute, but I think that this would be a good start into it. Is like, what does it take to put one of these together? I mean, there's so much time leading up to it, and then the day of,
Yeah.
unbelievable.
All of the equipment, the really nice high-speed camera that you were running for velocity, that took some doing to get.
Which I was shocked you asked me to run. I was like, do you know who you're asking to run this thing, dude?
Yeah, but you figured it out, and we got some good data from it.
Yeah, it worked out.
Yep. So I got that as soon as I started my PhD program, but I obviously did not have that camera for previous experiments. To get a bison is like, how do you get one? That's why my first experiment was on a cow.
Ranch, huh?
Yeah, Eagles Wing Ranch in
Incredible
North
meat,
Park.
too.
Yep.
Such cool people that own that spot. Too,
Yeah,
man.
and a gorgeous ranch. Just so scenic.
I want to bring up a good point too. We're going to dive right back into that, and I'm sorry I'll divert you left and right here, but I thought it was really cool how the rancher Jim, right?
Yeah, Jim Perez.
When the bison was expired, and it was just like a moment where we were just all kind of gathered around, appreciative of what the bison was.
Yeah,
I don't
absolutely.
want to say sacrifice for, but what was going on that day, right?
Yeah.
Grateful for his life, grateful for having a carcass to conduct these sort of experiments on, and such a beautiful setting, man. Like, where we did this was an aspen backdrop, mountains almost 270-degree angles around you. Like, we're just in this valley up near the medicine belt. It's just an incredible spot, and I just thought it was really well done. Like, it was how I would want something to expire or something, or like, if my body was going to science, it's exactly how I want it to go.
Pristine location. And they're super respectful for their animals. I mean, they love their animals there. So that was a big concern, the first one we did, he made a point afterwards to say, hey, I really appreciated that you guys were respectful and everything, because we put a lot of work into these animals, and we really like our bison. Yeah. So, but getting a bison, that's a huge challenge. Pretty much you have to have money. You need a grant, or you need a donor or something like that to get one. All of the stone points, very few of them are napped by me. I'm not that great a napper. So we collect those from different nappers that donate them. So in this last one, it was pretty much Donnie that reached out to a bunch of people and asked for donations. And Donnie also made several of the points. So huge shout out to the Flint nappers. They've put a lot of work into that.
Incredible. Over 50 points, different construction method. Beautiful stuff. Yeah.
And then I halved most of them to 4 shafts, carefully match those up with the main shafts, the dart main shafts, and also arrows, because we're testing some arrows.
So I guess to dial it back a little bit and go into a bit more of the construction of the points and stuff, did you send them some sort of like dimensions or blueprints, or like something like, hey, I need something that I can haft really well that has, is it
Pine
the
pitch.
flute? To feel the flute and
fluted base. We asked for some of those, but pretty much a flint napper, a skilled flint napper, all you have to do is say, hey, I want a Clovis point. And they know exactly what you're talking about. Hey, I want a Dalton point. Can you make me like late archaic corner notch point? They know what you're talking about. Because they've studied the archaeological record, they've studied the artifacts. And that's a big part of what's driving their desire to flint nap, is that fascination, like we were talking about, the archaeological record. And then and then you will find flint knappers that mostly make like modern, more artistic types of things. But they generally can make some kind of archaeological example as well. So all we have to do is ask for donations.
And then did you ask, because I know some of this was like different types of stone. So we had obsidian, we had slate. I think that there were, I don't know, I'll let you get into that. There was some Georgetown stone.
Yeah, that's right. There were some different cherts, what we call cherts. They generally occur in it's silica that's been turned into sort of a dense, knappable material. Obsidian is volcanic glass, of course. Basalt is a volcanic rock.
And all these rocks kind of start with a very sharp edge on them. Like Donnie's got some flakes here that he's given me, and I even found myself in the butchering process. I started with some serrated stuff, worked great. Yeah, but just a flake with just a razor sharp edge on it seemed to be a lot more effective for me.
When they break, they make a razor sharp edge. I find that these flakes like this are perfect for cutting through skin. Yeah. Once you get through the skin, you want a hafted knife, or at least I do. I want like a knife and a handle, and that's where a biface.
So hafted would be something like this,
like that.
Okay.
Just like that.
So
that's
it's
really similar.
Half stone, half blade, and then half wood or some sort of handle.
Yeah,
right?
it's hafted.
Fore shaft. Yeah.
Hafted to a handle. Yeah,
and then were you received all the points, and then did you personally have to connect them to all the fore shafts?
Yeah, I hafted all of them. It's a tremendous amount of work.
Yeah. How long did that take you?
Well, I had some kind of sleepless nights there trying to get all those points ready for the last one. I think ideally I would spend like a couple of months doing that, to get up to a point where I've got like 70 of them for a bison. Because you want more than you need. We want to be able to use them all until it's time to butcher. But yeah, I mean, we get them. People just make them from whatever stone they like to make to flint knap and send them to us. And I do a lot of work photographing them, weighing them, measuring them.
The photographs are incredible too. That are on the dissertation, man. That's awesome. Like to see all the points lined up at different angles and like. Yeah. It was super cool.
Yeah, and then once I have them, I photo them for photogrammetry. So you just kind of spin it and take a bunch of pictures, and you can create a 3D model of it, and then you can do a lot of stuff with a 3D model. So all of that has to be done, huge amount of work, of prep work to build up to running one of these.
So once I guess let's get into the fore shaft too a little bit here, since we're still kind of on the construction method. This was something that I was totally in shock. I'm thinking 70 arrowheads, 70 darts. That's just my 70 arrows, 70 arrowheads. Like that's just always my conception. And I think we can go down a bit of a rabbit hole here too. So we'll have to come back to this. So we got to remember what we were talking about your experiment and the process, and we'll kind of tail it off here at the end. But the fore shaft opened a whole new world of like, number one, how smart and innovative these people were that I didn't give them credit for. Because I'm thinking, as a kid out there picking up stuff, you're picking up various sizes, right? Yeah. And I would imagine, being a bow hunter myself and growing up being a bow hunter, you use different grain broadheads, and you'll use different broadheads for different species. And sometimes you have a blunt tip for certain, things like that. So total arrow weight is a big thing. So I really thought like this opened to my eyes is like, this is how you can be effective. Like say maybe you're going out to hunt bison. You don't find any bison, but you've passed a bunch of deer, but you're set up to hunt bison. Obviously you can kill something that you could take down a deer with something that you could take down a bison, but maybe you don't want to. Yeah. So this made it much more optimized. Of a universal toolkit for multiple fore shafts to fit into one main shaft.
That's one idea. Yeah, absolutely. You can, where this stuff is best preserved is in drier climates. Obviously wood is going to preserve better in a drier climate under a rock shelter. So In the Southwest, in the southwestern U.S., we've got preserved atlatls and darts. These that I've given you are made of cane. This one is actual river cane, Arundinaria gigantea from the southeastern United States, and they were definitely using this stuff for atlatl darts and arrows.
It's very
We've got
straight.
some examples. Yeah, it's nice and strong. This other one is Tonkin cane actually, but in the Southwest they were using willow, and predominantly willow, coyote willow, or sandbar willow, and they're wrapping the force shafts. They're drilling into they're wrapping the socket of the main shaft, and they're drilling out the main shaft for something like about 2 inches or 1 3/4 inches. And they're fitting in force shafts, and they're finding all the different force shafts so that you've got some that are longer, some that are shorter, and some that are blunt for small game. Yeah. So the whole thing is there, and it's a very beautifully made, well-crafted toolkit, hunting kit.
Some real engineering behind it.
Absolutely, yeah. And most of the time we don't realize that because all we're finding are the projectile points, and people don't even sometimes, I think, stop to think, well, that actually looked different to them because it was hafted. Their end goal was not the unhafted point; it was the hafted point. It's like that the hafting, or the basal morphology is how you attach the point.
And
to
the pine
foreshaft.
pitch glue too. Like Donnie's brought us in a piece of pine pitch glue here too that he's made up.
Yeah.
And this stuff is fascinating to me because I would have never thought of that. I just figured that they were taking some sort of like sinew or something and just wrapping it around to attach an arrow to a.
Sure. In some cases they were using
Yeah.
just straight sinew. Most of the time, at least with some kind of glue or mastic. Hide glue works really well, but hide glue isn't necessarily easy to make either. And pine pitch, the stuff that Donnie makes is really good. There's some real chemistry that goes into making that. You need to get the proportions right. You want to control the heat just right. You're mixing in different materials like some really finely ground up charcoal and that sort of thing to make really good
I think there's
pitch.
moose poop in his
Yeah,
too.
ground
as well.
up moose.
Yeah.
I did elk, I think, for the last one. Elk or deer or rabbit.
I mean, that is rock hard.
And it makes the pitch is resin that comes straight out of pine tree. It's more brittle, so you're trying to give it some structure. That's the purpose
It
of
makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
and you're trying to make it a little harder too with the adding the charcoal to it, and so getting those mixtures just right is really important. And we don't know that we've isolated particularly how ancient people were making pitch. They may have had a stronger mixture. So there's some real skill and knowledge that goes into crafting and using these weapons.
Yeah, I think that this is probably the earliest forms of engineering, right? Would be at this point. Like, I mean, we even got into it a little bit, like the connection between the foreshaft and the main shaft on how to make for strength, right? And one thing that blew me away in the experiment too was this thing would get hurled or thrown into the bison, and then at the point you could pull the whole dart out and the foreshaft would stay in the main shaft, even with all that force, like pulling it all the way out. It was very few foreshafts disconnected from the main shaft.
That's
pretty unbelievable.
Is what I spent a lot of time on this last one, carefully fitting the foreshafts, because you want the foreshaft, if you want to maximize penetration and try and, in some cases they weren't necessarily using foreshafts. Certainly in the Yukon, they're finding darts that are not really foreshafted. They're made of multiple components. They're composite, but they're using a different kind of connection where you have two beveled ends, beveled in an opposite way directions, and so when you put the bevels together, you have one solid shaft, and they're gluing and wrapping those. So they're not like removable foreshafts. The points are connected right to the end of the main shaft. So if you want a foreshaft for an experiment that's gonna you can remove the foreshaft and replace it with a new point and keep using the main shaft. That helps because it really cuts down the amount of work you're having to do to make the main shafts. A single thrower that's using one or two main shafts gets a feel for them, and is more effective than if they're like switching out main shafts all the time. So it's good to do that in an experiment, but then you have this like wrapping area that can create more drag. So you want the foreshaft to have a nice smooth transition to the main shaft. When they hit bone with a lot of force, the foreshaft will get jammed back into the main shaft, and like the bindings can even break.
It split the main shaft, right? And I don't think
That
we
can
had
happen,
one main shaft split on that last one.
No,
did we?
because what I did this time is I used a separate socket of cane and then a wood component that went up inside the socket. And so the foreshafts were fitted so they were snug down in there, but then they butted up against that plug down in the socket. So that way
so it's not a splitting motion. It's a solid connection.
Solid connection, exactly. But
That
we
makes
could
sense.
still switch out and use a bunch of different points with a single main shaft.
Okay, so even going down a further rabbit hole here, for me, warrior culture is always in the back of my mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
War. Not only were these people weren't just like walking around, and they were victim to predation as well, or war, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yep.
I guess is there, and I know have you dug into any like these being used for combat or anything, done any studies on that? Because I would think that like this would be a fast way for you to retrieve darts and put another point on it if it's broken, right? And maybe construction methods, whether versing wartime or peacetime, right? Because things are made at a much more rapid pace with it less attention to detail maybe, right? During wartime?
Well, it could be. I mean, certainly the like Mesoamerican weapons, the ones that have survived and been passed down to us are really well made. And the weapons can be highly functional, but not necessarily look super pretty. But they knew, I mean, they were crafting good weapons. They were using cane as well in Mesoamerica. And according to historical sources, they were using foreshafts as well, just because cane is hollow. So if you want to attach a point to the end here, it can be beneficial to have a wooden foreshaft to haft it to. That also gives it some more weight up front. So if you want to make the dart a little heavier.
Anybody that's an archery hunter will understand that.
Yeah, weight up front. And so they're still making them this way for combat roles, but not necessarily, they're not being used under the same kinds of constraints, like you said. When you're hunting, if you're hunting bison out on the plains and you're walking for weeks, you probably don't want to carry around 20 darts with you. You can carry 3 main shafts and 24 shafts and really cut down on
It's really being effective with your kit. I mean,
exactly. Yep.
What do we kind of think the primitive kit was at that? I mean, I guess it depends on the era, right? And
sure, yeah. What kind of environment they're living in, what they're hunting. Are you living in the Great Basin or in the mountains or in the plains or in the east? And are you more sedentary or are you more mobile? All of that factored into to the weapons kit.
Well, you think about all the different variables that we have today, right? There's so many mediums to hunt from. There's so many nuances to it. There's so many traditions. I mean, you still have traditional bow hunters today. I mean, if you could hunt with atlatls in a certain spot, I'm sure that there's guys that go out and would love the opportunity to go do that, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, how much, like, traditionally, because you said some of the stuff has been recovered in Africa. We know that it's been in North America. You found there's some that's been found in Antarctica. Is that correct?
Or in the Arctic.
Or in the Arctic, I'm sorry. Yep. How much is this technology, you think, shared across? Is that something that you guys are looking at?
Oh, yeah. Is it independent invention? Is it shared? Is it diffusion?
I just think of modern warfare right now, and you kind of want to keep the technology away from your enemy, right? Like, you don't want to share the stealth bomber with somebody else if you've just created it, right? It's to stay one step ahead. But then at the same time, it's also really spurs the evolution of weaponry up to the modern day, right?
Yeah, warfare can certainly drive technological advances that you may not see in hunting. So I think you were mentioning at the first.
I'm all over the place right now, so I apologize, but I'm like a kid in a candy store right now.
It's an exciting topic. The timeline is really interesting. When did the bow come in? When did the atlatl? That sort of thing. So we know javelins at least date back 300,000 years, maybe 500,000 years or older. Probably older, I would guess. But the earliest evidence of the bow and arrow is about 70,000 years ago in Africa, and they're finding these stone points that are extremely similar to
70,000 years.
Yeah, they're extremely similar
awesome.
to much later points. Like even the Egyptians used this point type, and you find them in like really well-made arrows with these points in the tombs of pharaohs. So they're finding these 70,000 years. The earliest evidence of the atlatl is about 20,000 years ago, and that's in Europe. Problem is,
so the bow, does that make the bow before the atlatl, or
that would, yeah. The problem is we don't know necessarily just from looking at stone points whether they were fitted to a spear or an atlatl dart. And there's even some really giant arrows out there. I mean, Ep.II did a study of Papua New Guinea hunters who are using these big like rebar points that are as big as javelin points. So so it's hard to tell just from the stone point, but so those dates or the date for the earliest atlatl come from actual components of the atlatl themselves that are found in caves. A lot of them have been found in France. And so potentially the bow and arrow was earlier. And then there are suggestions that people in Europe, when they were using these atlatls really early on, they were also using the bow. And so these weapons kind of co-occur. And so to bring it back around, hunting, you can use a weapon like this effectively if the way that you're hunting is it's useful if you're like driving big game out on the plains and you're like driving them past hunters, you're driving them into arroyos and you're getting up on top of them and throwing big darts.
Which
down
I think
onto
is
them.
a great point. There's so many different, like we view hunting as like one arrow, one bullet, one kill type of thing. I mean, we have cliff jump situations, right, that came into play later on. We have tactics of even poisoning, right? So
hunting
poisoning animals. So basically, whatever was the fastest means to
or the
getting
most
a meal, right?
the most effective. I mean,
the most effective.
anybody who hunts knows that it's not easy in the slightest. It's extremely challenging, and so you have to have tactics that work to get you close. And if you're using a traditional bow or an atlatl and dart, you got to be close. They're probably taking most of the shots I imagine in the past were taken within like 15 yards with both technologies. And
is that why you did most of your shots at 20 meters for this
or
experiment? Or was it 20 meters?
12 meters.
12 meters, sorry.
Yeah, so that's about 15 yards.
Okay.
Yep, that's a typical hunting distance, and it's pretty easy to get darts on target on a bison at that range and get like really good consistent results and maximize our time. So this weapon, it's really not surprising. It wouldn't be surprising if we looked back in the archaeological record and realized, the bow and arrow is earlier than we thought in North America. And it just didn't replace this weapon rapidly because you have things like tradition.
Because that's the first concept that pops into my head is like one replace the other.
Yeah, and most people think that way, especially in our society, modern societies. Most modern societies, not just Western societies, are technology obsessed. We're obsessed with technology, and we expect technological determinism to be a thing in the past. So technology drives human behavior. It's like determines human behavior. That's not necessarily the case. People can choose different technologies, and there are cases when simpler technologies, cheaper, easier to manufacture technologies, even today, are more useful to us.
I'll give you a good example of that just on the archery side. Like I go up to a 3D archery course. It's an amazing spot. Shout out to American Bowmen. The president I go up and shoot with occasionally, Scott Indrich, amazing guy, traditional archer. I shoot a compound. He can knock arrows faster and get on target than I can with my compound because there's too many sequences where I'm adjusting a sight and looking through a peep and you know attaching a release where he's just kind of a shoot and go. So
Yeah, if
he
you're
can
shooting
run
running
through the
game,
course. Yeah, he can run through the course probably twice as fast as I could, in theory.
Yeah, traditional bows are they're still a useful tool. I mean,
And there's a large community of guys that
yep,
that's what they do. They shoot traditionally and
yep,
hunt traditionally.
yep. But when somebody comes at you with a weapon and is intent to kill you, to bring it back to weapon technology for combat, certainly that could drive weapon evolution. Really good exception, though, is Mesoamerica. I mean, they were big armies, tens of thousands or even in some cases hundreds of thousands of soldiers on the battlefield, with a lot of military strategy and the elite warriors. This was their projectile weapon. They were also fielding slings, like David and Goliath slings, bows and arrows, but they were using this weapon quite a bit. Not surprising
I forgot that in our
again.
timeline from Blunt Objects, because you could use a sling to throw a stone pretty damn
Oh,
well.
yeah, slings came along, but once again, really hard to identify that weapon in the archaeological record. But, that's not surprising because in medieval times, even people were still using javelins in Europe. I think
I'm sure it's great for armor piercing stuff because
Yeah.
one of the things that I was shocked at is how much it moved, and I didn't really put it in perspective until I saw how much damage it was actually doing to a bison. And then you're watching it in high speed. So like the broadheads that I shoot, the arrow tips, if you're not an archery person, that I shoot for hunting are 3-bladed, fixed blade, razor sharp with a machine. They blow through bone.
Yep.
At the speed and the length of my arrow and my arrow weight. It's designed that way to hunt elk. And it's designed to go through a rib bone, or I don't know that it would go through a shoulder bone, and luckily I've never had to find out.
Yeah,
but like
you don't want to hit a shoulder, but
you're looking to shoot them in the thoracic cavity, the main cavity where all their organs, their breathing, blood pumping organs are at.
Yep.
So I think about that, and that's razor sharp, and it goes through, and it creates a pretty good hole. Typically, you're finding an animal by their blood trail if you're spot and stalk type of hunting, or one animal at a time. So I didn't really put in perspective, one, how much these would penetrate. But then I started thinking about the motion, and I think Donnie even brought this up to me. When we're watching it in high speed, and Gabby, I think on the desktop there is a folder with some of this high speed footage if we need to pull it up, if you want to start looking for it. The password, and I'll just bleep it out. So when this goes in, and as much as that dart moves, it's penetrating, but it's also still has all this motion where it's just
the shaft is
cutting
is
and
vibrating.
eviscerating
So,
whatever's in there.
I mean, they punch in. A lot of times on a bison, they're not punching all the way through. They're usually, and we can tell that they're hitting the opposite side of the thorax, and the
might be more effective is what I'm getting at.
Yeah,
by it's in there inside of their cutting, and if they're running off, then it's doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's the big thing is it's coming in, it's stopping there at the opposite side, and then it's inside, just like straight up right inside the thoracic cavity, and they're running. It's moving around, cutting. Yeah, it's
especially as long as these darts are, because if something started to run off, you have all this cantilever. Yeah. Right? I mean, you can see how much the cantilever moves. So it's on the desktop, and it's in a folder. So if you minimize this screen, Jeremy said buffalo hunt. Yeah, so these are some that Donnie had sent us with your permission that we put up over the podcast.
Yeah, let's show some of those.
Yeah.
Just any of them? Okay.
Yeah, just click on it, and then you should be able just to go full screen.
Yeah, so this point is fun because it just explodes.
Yeah, that is crazy.
So it's a complete failure. So from this type of data, we're seeing not only information about how they perform when they do penetrate, but also what's not working, and that's helping us reverse engineer the weapon. So we're also learning while we're doing this.
Those cameras are incredible. What kind of camera was that? So we can give them a shout out.
Yeah, this is a Kronos 1.4
That's right.
by Krontech.
God, I had so much fun hanging out with you guys that day. Anytime you need some help, I'm ready, Devin.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, and I hope we can do this again on another Bison at Eagle's Wing.
I know this came up during the campfire, but maybe I was too many tequilas deep at that point. What do you think about them trying to clone woolly mammoths and that sort of like, I think we briefly touched on that. I mean, I don't know if that's actually being done, but like.
Yeah, people are working on it. And we don't really know why woolly mammoths died out. There's another one that failed. The base broke, so the base is still in the half there. Yeah, we don't know why a lot of megafauna died out at the end of the Pleistocene. It's a big question. It's really a fascinating topic.
Is that some of what you're trying to answer, like the effectiveness of these tools? And
yeah, we're using this data a little bit to look back at how effective they might be, because you can take all the statistical analysis of shots and just play with it a little bit and say, well, what kind of average penetration would we get if they were experiencing a lot more force to cut through skin, if they're like trying to get through a really burly hide of a mammoth or something like that. How deep might they penetrate with XYZ other variables involved? Yeah, we're interested in looking at how effective the weapons were. That doesn't necessarily tell us if people were hunting animals to extinction. So we don't know that, and we don't know how these animals were responding to environmental change. We definitely suspect that for many of the species, the changing environment was a huge factor, and it may have been like a 1-2 punch where the environment was changing and a new predator came on the landscape and started exploiting these struggling smaller populations, and that was enough. And once they disappear from the archaeological record, that probably indicates that they were still around for 1,000 years or so or longer, because the last instance you see something in the archaeological record or in the paleontological record isn't necessarily the last time it was on the landscape. It usually represents the last time it was populated
enough to hunt or
enough
forage.
to leave a trace, because most things don't. How many of the elk that you've hunted do you think 10,000 years from now you would be able to find and excavate and say a human hunted this animal?
I've gone back a week later and haven't found a carcass.
Exactly.
I mean, there's other predators that, especially around here, like we have bears that will sit there and wait for us to drag a deer off to get on what's left of it.
Yeah, big animals. And back in the Pleistocene, you had huge scavengers with really strong jaws that could bust apart those heavy bones.
And they eat the bone marrow out of it, you know what I mean? So that just gets eviscerated, and then
it's just gone, yeah.
Then you have all the smaller rodents and stuff that they use the bone, they eat it. Birds make nests out. I mean, it's a circle of life, man. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, so something has to die. You have to have a really good indication that it was actually hunted, and then it has to be preserved. So it has to be buried, and it has to be buried in the right kind of soil that's going to preserve bone. If you go to the eastern part of the country, the soil it's not friendly to bone. So you will very rarely find anything made of bone. So the archaeological record and the paleontological records, they're not perfect by any means. We're just capturing a little window. But we have a pretty significant number of mammoth kills in the United States. I think the number, it's like 14 or something like that, that even skeptics agree on. But for a period from towards the end of the Pleistocene till these animals have disappeared, we've only got like 80 total specimens. So it's like a significant number that have actually been hunted, that we know that were hunted. Nevertheless, we can't say, well, people were hunting these animals to extinction. It's a really challenging topic. So bringing back mammoths, it seems irresponsible because
It seems like Jurassic Park to me. It's like, what's next? Are we bringing back the short-faced bear or saber-toothed tigers? Or
maybe what we should do is focus on preserving the climate and the wildlife that we have, instead of bringing back new species
and please don't send it to the ballot box. Like let scientists and biologists and archaeologists figure this stuff out for us and help. I mean, we pay tax dollars to a lot of these people too to figure out these problems and to have it voted. I don't know. That's a personal graph. I don't even want to waste our time on that.
It's probably out of our hands because it'll probably happen in like China or Russia. Or
right.
Something.
Yeah.
So. Wow,
that's pretty incredible. Okay, so diving back into the experiment, we've gone through construction. What's kind of the next step? I know that we got into the butchering process. Was any of that I know it was documented by photos and stuff like that. Was that part of the study?
It was, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we do the whole thing. I mean, we're throwing a bunch of different darts, building up a sample of shots, butchering, we're documenting that, what tools we used, and then the bones, this time the bones I took to a taxidermist in Broomfield who is working on the bones, Artworks Taxidermy in Broomfield. So they're cleaning up the skeleton, and then we're going to look at
the entire skeleton. So like, just so people listening to this, I mean, we took every ounce of meat off of that you could take, from the neck to the ribs to everything.
Yeah, all went in coolers and is delicious apparently. Yep.
It's unbelievable. You didn't get any yet?
No. I was like, I'm moving to Texas pretty soon, and I've got a lot of.
God, I feel bad. I should have made some like steaks for you for lunch or something.
Okay. I've had bison. It's great, but
it's unbelievable.
Yeah, it
really is.
So but the bones, we're going to look at the skeletal lesions, so evidence of impact trauma. We're capturing like specifically where each point hit, its orientation, what happened, what kind of forces, kinetic energy were occurring in that penetration event, what happened when the point hits bone, what happens to the point, and what happens to the bone. So we want to clean up the bone, look at those impact damages, and then we want to look for butchering marks from stone tools. And what that looks like if you butcher a whole bison. I mean, because we completely disarticulated this animal. So what's it going to look like in comparison to bison that are found archaeologically, where, again, we don't know how those animals were butchered, specifically how they were butchered.
So when we were in the butchering process and we got down to the very end, we found one, I believe it was a slate point that was still lodged into one of the ribs.
Yeah.
Is that going to stay in the rib, or will you?
That one fell out, unfortunately, in transport. Man. Yeah, completely lost it. I have no idea.
Oh, no way.
I think when we picked up the
carcass, we should have like taped it in there or cellophaned it or something.
Well, I wasn't paying attention. I was so exhausted. I mean,
that was a long day. It was an awesome day, but
freaking exhausted by that point that we actually slid the rib cage in with that point down.
Oh no.
But one of Donnie's points, this chert arrow point, that just punched right through a rib and then snapped off right at the base. That one is lodged in a rib, still there. And I think there might be a couple of others. So when the bones get cleaned up, those will be in there. And the taxidermist has told me already that there's a couple projectile points there. I can't remember exactly what he said, but there were some. Yeah,
is he
points
doing it with beetles, or is it?
He's using. He called it slow maceration, like hot water. So he's not using. I don't think it's even qualifies as. It might qualify as maceration. I'm not sure if that's technically correct. Maceration is generally when you have it in water. You're just putting in water. It's kind of warm water. There's a lot of bacteria. It gets really nasty, and that the bacteria is taken off the all the soft tissues. In this case, I think it's like a really slow, low boil is what he's doing. to remove the soft tissues. So there are various different ways you can get.
And then, are you going to put the whole skeleton back together, or will it just be piece by piece so you can do more studies on it?
Exactly. So it goes into a comparative collection is what we're going to use it for. I'm taking it down with me to Sewell Ross in Texas. We're going to use it for our comparative collection. So when we find bone in the archaeological record, a lot of times you're just finding individual pieces of bone, and you don't know what it is. And you want a comparative sample of a mule deer, a pronghorn, a bison, a bunch of different animals that you can go and look at the bones, the specific structure of the bones, the morphology, and say, okay, this is a bison vertebra, or something like that. So it works for a comparative collection, and then it works for looking at butchering marks and skeletal lesions. So it's kind of a multi-purpose.
It's so awesome because literally every part of this bison was used. I mean, short of some bowels.
Absolutely,
And
Donnie
even those were gone by the time we were leaving. I think there were some birds circling around. So.
Yeah. Donnie took even the hide. So certainly we used.
That's cool, and it's going to be continue to get used too. I think that's awesome, and I feel very fortunate for you letting me be a part of it. I really appreciate it. We're kind of coming up on time here. I want to be respectful of your time. But I have a few more questions if you can hang out for a bit. Yeah.
Let's do it.
So I know kind of going through this and reading some of the dissertation and stuff like that, basket maker reference. What does that mean? That was something I was like, and you guys had mentioned it a couple times when we were out there, and I just didn't put it together.
Yeah.
So
I've got a website that I haven't updated in a long time called Basket Maker Atlatl and Dart. It does have some good information on there. Basket maker is an archaeological phrase. It's an old term. I think it was introduced in 1919 to refer to an archaeological horizon in the North American Southwest where people are making basketry, but they're not making pottery yet. So these are like early archaic to late archaic people. It ends around like 1,500 years ago, I think. I don't think I have that exactly right, and Southwestern archaeologists are going to be wagging a finger at me. But
we can Google something. I don't know that would help, though. It's okay. I don't think it helps. It's probably misinformation anyway.
Oh, it might be under general on my website, history. It might be in there somewhere. Okay. So anyway, that's what it means. Basket makers, it's an archaeological term for cultures that called themselves something different. And they used the type of atlatl I was talking about earlier from the Southwest with willow main shafts and different fore shafts fitted in. They're mostly about the size of the darts that I've given you here, especially the little bit lighter one.
These are awesome.
Yeah. And they're mostly, I think the big game that they're hunting with them was mostly desert bighorns, although they may have hunted some bison and elk and that sort of thing as well. And their atlatls looked a little bit different than this. They were like kind of board-like and had a groove running up them and finger loops.
There were so many different variables in that between yours
a lot of
and
different
John's
variations.
And Donnie's, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, tremendous amount of variation, particularly in the atlatl and the grip and how they're gripping them.
Why are these experiments so important to you and to the community of people that want to know more?
Yeah.
Whether it's scientists or archaeologists or anthropologists,
Yeah, well, I think in terms of hunting is an extremely important human activity, and I hope it remains an important human activity.
Too. It's important to us here. So
it's something that we need to continue. And in a lot of ways, it's practical. We need it because you're not going to introduce some of the main predators back into the Northeast, for instance. That's just not going to work. So it's really important, and there's a deep history of it, and unlocking that history is really important. We don't want to just know that people hunted. how did they hunt? Like, what kind of weapons did they use? How innovative were their weapons? How effective, and like what kinds of tactics did they use? And as we look into that really deeply, we realize these people were they're really smart, really innovative
Incredible.
people.
I learned a lot just being out there with yours.
Yeah.
So I encourage people, if you have any sort of fascination with primitive culture, primitive hunting, or paleolithic, I don't know what you would call it, engineering.
Yeah.
Definitely go read your dissertation, because it's broken down really well. It's incredible, and it was incredible to be a part of it firsthand. So thank you for inviting me. That was
absolutely.
I'd love to do it again.
Sure.
God, that totally just broke my train of thought. So how many others? I know where I was going with this. Like, how many? Are you the only one that's doing kind of this reverse engineering type of archaeology? Have there been other studies, and is it a group of you that are doing this?
Yeah, this builds on a body of research that's been going on for quite a while, with some prominent archaeologists that have been trying to rebuild these weapons, reverse engineer them, test them in very similar ways, although they haven't used the kinds of instruments that are available to us now, and to understand, how they break, how they perform. But it goes back to certainly in the 80s and 90s, it was starting to pick up this type of research. But mostly now I'm seeing kind of a little bit of a disturbing trend where people are relying on controlled experiments, and they're not really cross-referencing them with more naturalistic kinds of experiments. They're just going directly from a controlled experiment to interpretation. Which you can do to an extent, but you really have to.
There's even archaeologists that are doing that.
Oh yeah, there are archaeologists. Yeah, there's a lot of projectile research out there.
Because I know I've seen some influencers or celebrity hunters do some, and
yeah.
I don't know, and they have their own opinions on it, I guess, without having any archaeological background to really back it up, right? Like. In my eyes,
there's certainly some exceptions. Donnie knows a lot about this stuff, and
unbelievable.
And really reached out to me about a lot of it as well. So a lot of the people that are doing this just out of fascination, they're also researching this on their own. So there are some knowledgeable people out there, but I want to say something that's a little bit off topic here.
Go for it.
Which is that we shouldn't feel bad if we go hunting elk with a compound bow or a rifle. Don't feel bad that you're not using something like this.
I don't.
Because the world has changed dramatically. So one thing that I've been researching, and I haven't published on this yet, but it's pretty much obvious. If you're a hunter, you know that the animals that you hunt respond to how they're being hunted. They're not just like passive prey. They have anti-predator behaviors, and there's actually quite a body of research on this in wildlife management. You can't just increase hunter numbers and expect a corresponding decline in wildlife if you're trying to control the wildlife population, because the animals respond. Especially,
they're super smart. That's why their success rates too, right?
Yeah, and as they're responding to predator densities, big time. So they're gonna become more wary. They're gonna be more nocturnal. They're gonna even just like vacate an area.
Calling's a big one that I've noticed. Like they don't call. Elk, especially like during their mating season, they're not calling as much as they did when I was a kid. It's like. That was kind of the mystique behind me being out there. I love hearing a bugle, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like you're in Jurassic Park. And
it's hard to find one bugling.
It's hard, yeah.
In Colorado, for sure.
Especially in an over-the-counter tag unit. Good luck.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the long story short, human populations are a lot higher now, and hunting is just harder.
Mm-hmm.
So don't feel bad about using an effective projectile weapon, because that's our history. That's what humans.
That's a great point, and I don't think it is
bring down animals.
Even as a rifle hunter either. I know that bow
Yeah.
hunting's gotten very popular lately and stuff. And funny enough, we just brought this up on the last podcast. I had Tom Clum in from Rocky Mountain Specialty Gear. He's awesome, traditional. I think he's like a level 4 USA archery coach.
Yeah.
It was really got his stuff together, and they probably have the best traditional bow shop in the country. But he brought up that very same point, like, don't feel inferior if you're hunting with a compound. Like, really, I think it comes down to efficacy too. Whatever you're going to have the most success and feel the most confident in, because the last thing you want to do is be out there. Nothing feels worse than wounding an animal. So, like, be confident in your tools, right? Like, I'm sure that these primitive engineers would appreciated probably the same sort of concept too. I think is efficiency, right?
Yeah,
that's why you see the evolution in these.
Yeah, it's a tightrope walk, between being ethical and still hunting.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to use something that the thing I imagine. There was some crazy movie back in the 90s that I watched and disturbed me as a child.
Hollywood does not depict hunting very well.
No, but this was actually an assassination where this guy was using the sniper rifle that was like controlled by a computer. And this.
Oh, was it one of the diehards or something? Was it the one where it was in the van or something? Or
no, it was a different one. I think he was trying to assassinate the president of the United States. But in any case, there were some disturbing scenes in that. But I always think back to that, like, we can make that, and you could just you could have 100% instant kill rate with that. But would you be hunting anymore? So
that's not hunting,
exactly.
So but it is at the end of the day, like.
I mean,
you think about some of these tactics like a cliff jump. I have an uncle that lives up in northern Montana. That is in the backcountry all of September. Like, this guy, this is his life, is hunting. Yeah. And he had to call. He called in to Game and Fish because there were guys pushing herds of elk with drones.
Oh.
And it's so easy to get a drone nowadays and launch it, and like that's a new tactic, right? Like, is probably pretty effective, I would imagine, if you have a camera on that thing and can see, like, I don't know.
So it is a
totally
tightrope,
illegal, by the way, too. So don't get any bright ideas. But
I have no intention. I love rifle hunting, but even there, you have to spend the time to develop the comfort level and the skill with your weapon to be efficacious with
I've even
weapon.
brought it up here. I mean, I shoot my bow so much that I am more accurate with my bow at 40 yards than I would be with a handgun.
Oh, I believe it.
Which is pretty bad.
Yeah. Oh, I believe it, though. I mean, those compounds are really precise.
Oh, they're unbelievable.
Yeah, they're crazy.
So we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Devin, I really appreciate your time, man. I hope I wish you the best of luck going down to Texas, but I hope that we can do this again.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed having you in. Real quick, before you jump off here, what's coming up next for you? I mean, I know that you're going down to Texas. You probably need some time to get settled, but are there some more experiments along the horizon? Is there a way that people can? I know that you're on Instagram is it AR Atlatl?
Yeah, AR Atlatl on Instagram.
Definitely give Devin a follow if you want to see some of this data, some awesome photos.
Yeah, we've got the Basket Maker website that I think I'll spend some time updating once I get down there and give some information about the kinds of experiments we're doing. For all the people who have flint napped and donated points, I would love it. At some point, it's going to take me a while, but I'd love to get out a report showing how all these different points are performing and really break that down because we have variations in the material types and the shapes and how sharp they are and how they're performing. That's it's useful for flint nappers and archaeologists as well. So,
that's great. And then what is the new position down in Texas?
So this
can
is
you talk about that?
Sure. It's a visiting professor position.
Congratulations, man.
Thank you.
Awesome.
They have a strong wildlife management program down there. So they're kind of interested in my interest in building a connection between like ancient and modern hunting and focus on hunting. Hunting is really big in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what the future holds.
Incredible. All right. Well, I hope that you had a good time, and I'd love to have you back anytime. So you're welcome anytime.
Thank you.
And thank you everybody for listening to this one. Go check out the dissertation on this experiment that we talked mostly about today is available on your website as well.
Yeah, so
right?
this is the research article that came out on my dissertation, terminal ballistics of stone-tipped atlatl darts and arrows, and that one's open access. So you can.
There's also I found this through a link on your Instagram, so the link bio or the bio link.
Yeah, and we've got one out as well on problematic targets like ballistic gelatin.
Okay.
So yeah, that one's.
That's
kinda
where
fun.
I came up with that question, actually. That's awesome. All right, Devin, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you. And this is incredible, man. I'm going to go try this out. So
Yeah.
thank you
have
for the
fun with
gifts. Yeah, appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Mountainside Podcast. If you haven't had a chance to do this already, please take a moment, follow, like, subscribe, or rate on whatever platform you catch the Mountainside Podcast at. Also, if you'd like some more information on upcoming episodes, safety tips, access to all of our affiliates, and all the badass discounts that we get here at the Mountainside Podcast, check out themountainsidepodcast.com.